Yikes. I don't even know how else to start this thing. Woof. 46-43, Stanford on top of Colorado. The first bad loss of the Coach Prime era here at CU. Tough to come up with a lot to say after a collapse that epic. Colorado led 29-0 at the end of the first half. And from there on out, it was a complete and total failure from the top down. Coach Prime in the post-game press conference said that he felt complacency heading into the locker room. He addressed it in the locker room, and he said that the team that he hates, that we hate, that everybody can't stand was the one that came out of the locker room, and his fears were warranted. Well, it was Friday the 13th. Some weird stuff happens. Historically, I don't know as far as a 29-point comeback allowed, where that stands. It's got to be top three, maybe, if not the worst of all time in CU history. I'll tell you this, the game that we just watched, that collapse was worse than Oregon State in 2018. Mike McIntyre's team led 31-10 at half. Man, everything was just moving along perfectly after 30 minutes of game time. Colorado was 30 minutes away from entering the bye week with the exact narrative that they wanted. However, it completely flipped on them in the second half. Just a second, if you don't mind. I needed some time to wrap my head around this one. More appropriately than just an instant reaction, because a game where you have a collapse of that type of epic proportion deserves some adequate thought behind it. Colorado loses to Stanford 46-43. They fall to 4-3 on the season in a game that they led 29-0 at half. Let's just start there, I guess. 5 consecutive games heading into this one. Colorado had started slow. They just had not gotten off to good starts. Tonight, they were able to flip that script. In today's well-off media video, Coach Prime talked about how, I guess last night in a late-night practice to kind of simulate the kickoff time, they practiced on Folsom Field. He said to the team, do something different because we have not been getting off to good starts. So whatever you do to start, before games, at least before game day, don't do that. All right, well, it worked. 29-0. Hell of a first half. Shedeur Sanders getting going on the ground. Now, Colorado didn't really run the ball. 6 carries with running backs, but Shedeur 8 carries, 72 yards, including a massive scramble early in that game. It was great to see him running. How many times have I talked about that the last few weeks in the first and second quarter? It just opens up the offense, Xavier Weaver, massive first half, 3 touchdowns. He was fantastic, including the touchdown on the reverse that he basically walked into the end zone. And then at the end of the first half, they lost a little steam, right? They had scored touchdowns, I believe, in their first 4 drives of the game. And then you had the Alejandro Mata missed field goal at the end of the first half, which I guess at the end of the day turns out to be the difference, if you want to say that. But that obviously is not why they lost this football game. So they start the second half. And I made a video at halftime talking about, look, I hope they can rest key contributors in the second half. I hope Travis Hunter can find a way to maybe not play the whole fourth quarter. Should be a rocking chair finish. We were sitting back. And then the chair just collapsed out from under you. Colorado didn't make adjustments. What was working, and this has kind of been a theme from the coaching staff. Don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, you kind of have to anticipate that the team on the other sideline will make adjustments. And credit to Troy Taylor, head coach of Stanford, and that team and that coaching staff, because they did. But they blew a 29-point lead. And that's directly on coaching. Like, you can point the finger at players, but I'm going to point it right at the coaching staff. Top to bottom, Charles Kelly had his team ready to go in the first half. They held him to a goose egg. That CU defense shut out a team for an entire half a play. I understand it's the worst team in the conference. Still a Power 5 team. Shut them out. It's a damn good half of football. Offensively, put up 29. Probably should have been closer to 35. That being said, a lot of undisciplined play from Colorado. I think there were 9 penalties, I want to say, in the first half. They finished this game with 17 for 127. I mean, it was really undisciplined. At one point, the penalty disparity was 14-3. I just don't think in any football game, if officiated correctly, there's that large of a disparity. I just don't. In the first half, I truly believe that some of those calls, and this isn't being homer or anything, there were a lot of calls that kept Stanford in the game, deliberately. Like Travis Hunter with a weird celebration penalty, and then, the hit on the kickoff, the taunting, I don't know. I didn't like the way the game was officiated. But that, again, not why Colorado lost. Although 17 penalties, 127 yards, you want to make that argument, I got no problem. There's one point in this game where Stanford, I think it was at half, Stanford had combined for 53 yards passing between both their quarterbacks. As I sit here looking at the box score, Daniels finished with 396 yards and 4 touchdowns. I'll say that again. In the first half, they combined for like 53 yards passing. The kid finishes with 396 and 4 touchdowns. It's insanity. It's insanity. What transpired in the second half was just a complete and total failure of system, of structure, of communication. Colorado was infighting on the sideline. The frustration had gotten to them because they couldn't stop a simple slant. Elick, what's this kid's name? I better know it because he just had, one of the most incredible games that you're going to see at the college level. Elick Ayomanor, 13 balls, 294 yards and 3 touchdowns. The kid entered the game with 204 yards receiving on the season. He had 294 yards and 3 touchdowns in the second half and overtime combined. Basically all on slants. It wasn't like they were doing anything special, and a lot of it was on Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter in the first half, right? Huge touchdown, first as a buff. Had the second touchdown grab, which I think hurt him. I do. He was right back on the field, but his head snapped back and hit the turf, and he also took a shot to the ribs. The rest of the game, he was kind of like walking around, kind of like holding himself. I didn't like the way he looked. That being said, he got worked over royally, as did the rest of Colorado's secondary. On the 97-yard touchdown, Omarion Cooper just slipped and fell. That was just a simple slant. Again, these were mostly just slants. Watching that tape is going to be really hard. 13 catches, 294 yards. How many do you have in the second half? I'm going to have to look this. Look, the approach was what killed Colorado tonight. That was what killed them. It was the approach in the second half. They didn't adjust at all. They came out, same 5-wide empty set with a 30-point lead. Run the football. Let's see. Dylan Edwards, 4.7 per carry. Anthony Hankerson, 3.1. Alton McCaskill, 3.8. I'm sorry. It's good enough to run on first and second down to me with a 30-point lead. That's how you kill the clock. That's how you manage the game. And I get it. You want to get out to, a good start, and you want Shedeur to shine. I also understand that. At the end of the day, he finishes with, 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, and then that interception in overtime that he never should have thrown. Should have never thrown that ball. But we've talked about this ad nauseum now. Are you beholden to what you want to be, or are you adjusting to what you need to be? And in the second half, you're up by 30. You take time off the clock. You don't snap the ball with 25 seconds left on every play. With the hyper-tempo offense, again, when it fails and you can't rush the ball effectively and you're constantly in 3rd and long, you're going so fast, you race yourself off the field. Stanford scored 19 unanswered points in the third quarter before you could say Bob's your uncle. They finished scoring 26 unanswered points. In the fourth quarter, and overtime, in the second half and overtime, Stanford outscored Colorado 46-14. I don't even know what to say, man. Shedeur in the first half had 8 carries, 72 yards. By the time this game was over, 13 carries, 37 yards plus sacks. Stanford started getting home in the second half because they made adjustments. Colorado, with their third string right tackle, Harden, steps in there and had a horrible night. I mean, but you're at your third string right tackle. That's a tough one to overcome. Colorado's not nearly, deep enough in the trenches to go 2 deep, let alone 3 deep. So, again, when that happens and your offensive line is constantly struggling, you run the football to help those guys. And in the second half, they just really didn't, right? Like, they started running the ball, I think, after Stanford had gotten on the board a couple of times, scored 3 times with a field goal and 2 touchdowns. 29-19, you're sitting there going, oh boy, they better get their act in gear. And they did, right? But not before Stanford cut it to a 3-point game. And then Colorado scores again, makes it a 10-point game. Stanford scores again. Colorado, that was the worst one. Sean Lewis was brutal in the second half and overtime. Brutal. That was the worst one. The end of the game, third down, they throw the football to try and convert the first when all they needed to do was make Stanford use their last timeout. The hell are you thinking? Like, again, it's just a failure top down. The entire operation just faltered. And I'm putting most of it on the coaching staff. You don't blow a 29-point lead. You're either coaching it or allowing it to happen, as Coach Prime basically said in the post-game press conference. He was, he came in and said, I'm going to do my best to keep my composure here. He is, I don't think, ever been a part of anything like that. Neither is Shedeur. I thought Shedeur composed himself quite well for that press conference, because that's not easy to sit there and face the music after you blow a 29-point lead, the biggest blown lead in school history. Stanford's biggest comeback in school history. I mean, it's 29 points. They had them down 29-0. I've seen so much of the reaction afterwards, and a lot of it's warranted, I mean, you blow a game like that. I'll tell you something. The noise around this program is going to drastically quiet down. National television, it was late at night, but everybody stayed up for that. I will imagine that's going to pull huge ratings. And they just absolutely, the bed. Man. And here's the part about that loss. That's not one that you just get up off the mat from, right? Like, that is an emotional loss heading into a bye week. Coach Prime was like, after the game, was like, no, we'd love to get back out there immediately. Is this a good time for a bye? No. We want to go play tomorrow. Look, it's a good time for a bye. This has been a really emotional first 6 games of the season. Coming to this game off a short week, you've got them down 29-0. They look like they had nothing for you. Zero. And they were coming off a bye week. And then you absolutely just relaxed. And it caved in on you. It was like a boulder rolling downhill. Once Stanford got the momentum, Colorado just could not stop it. And part of that is because they couldn't stop the run. What was the time of possession? Colorado lost the time of possession battle by 9 minutes. This is what I talk about this is the stuff I'm talking about and the problems you run into with the hyper-tempo offense. If that is your only year, you're going to have problems. They were up 29-0 after the first half and won the time of possession battle by 6 minutes. Stanford was down 29-0. They got shut out. And they were ahead in the time of possession battle by 6 minutes. The hyper-tempo offense is great when it works, but that's a gear you want to go hyper-tempo. It's not necessarily the resting speed, especially if you do not have the defense to support it. And the running game, which, again, in the second half, they went back to Dylan Edwards between the tackles. I know he finished with 4.7 yards per carry, which was the highest average on the team. But, again, it's just like, there were some moments down the stretch there where you're like, what are you guys doing here personnel-wise? Travis Hunter comes back and was, 13 catches, 140 yards, 2 touchdowns. But the bigger story is clearly what he allowed. And that's this kid, Ayo Manor. Big body,
13 catches, 294 yards, 3 touchdowns. Holy moly, guys. This is one that you just look at it and go, what just happened? Right? It leaves you speechless, right? This is a new team, but at the very same time, the expectation is much higher. The expectation is much higher because they've earned that, because they're good enough. That's the worst team in the conference. You just let the rope slip and you just couldn't get a hold of it. You've got a lot of soul searching to do as a program here over the bye week. And like I said, Coach Prime didn't think that this is a great time for a bye, but the universe sure feels that way, or at least the schedule makers do, because you got to deal with it one way or another. You don't have a choice. And again, it's not one you just pick yourself right back off the mat from. It isn't. No. Emotionally, that one rocks you. You have to figure out how to pick up the pieces. And the biggest bummer about this entire situation, that was their most winnable game left on the schedule by a landslide. Now you've got Oregon State and Washington State, and Arizona and UCLA and Utah. I mean, those are all thorn in your side programs. Those are all tough games. You're now 4-3. You still need 2 more wins to reach bowl eligibility. And look, before the year, 4 to 5 wins. The problem here is, are you looking at a situation where you reel off like 3 losses in a row? I don't know. I don't know, because on the road at UCLA, that's a tough place to play. I don't think CU's won there. I mean, no, I don't think CU's won there since joining the pack. They beat UCLA. I don't think they won there. It's going to be an interesting 2 weeks. Normally, the media availability over the next week, over their bye week, is non-existent. I do wonder if that's how they keep it this week. I imagine it is. Coach Prime is going to have to take stock of that's going to be a tough film to watch, first of all. But they're going to have to take stock of why there is dysfunction like this with the team. And maybe it's part of just being a new collective. Maybe that is it. But it shouldn't happen the way it did tonight, clearly. But it's just there are too many problems popping up. It's like whack-a-mole. It's like, bam, fix the slow starts. What is happening? Even Shador, a couple weeks ago, Shador called this a second half team. Okay. They had been. Colorado throws for 400, rushes for 132. Again, the penalties, just so undisciplined. Some really bad ones. Crucial moments. Travis Hunter with a personal foul. Like I said, some calls I didn't love either. So I got to give him a break there. You know, in the second half, there were some really big sacks taken. When Shador takes sacks, it's not like he takes like 4-yard sacks. They're like 15-yard sacks, 10-yard sacks. He's just constantly running backwards because he's trying to make something happen, but it puts them in a really bad spot. Really bad spot. In Stanford, they haven't been able to rush the quarterback this year. So, again, there are some huge problems. Offensive line, you know, what did they get? Colorado only got 3 sacks tonight. I mean, Stanford's a running, that's the other part. Colorado got gashed on the ground tonight. Stanford only amassed 124 yards on the ground, but I felt like they just couldn't stop them rushing the football. I mean, there were a couple of stops, right? But quarterbacks gashed them. For sure. I mean, this kid, Ayo Manor, has 294 yards. Their next leading receiver at 38 yards. Again, there's the Khalil Tate game, and now there's the Ayo Manor game. Remarkable. I mean, just truly remarkable. I just look at some of the problems that Colorado's had. You talk about coaching staff tonight and maybe the first 6 games. They got some more problems than I think they have. That's a really, really bad failure in just about every regard. I mean, doesn't get worse, for being honest. You get your ass kicked or you blow a big lead. You pick which one is worse. I guess that's up for debate. The way I look at it, guys, it's just so unacceptable. Like I said, unconscionable, unfathomable. And a really hard one to pick yourself back up off the mat from. I believe that is a really good learning opportunity just to understand what can happen if you let go of the rope in such now it clobbered them over the head, that lesson, unfortunately, but overall, man, you know, I know that this is a team with a lot of talent, but there's just some glue that's missing. Like guys that step up and make really big plays at really big times. Travis Hunter is one of those guys. Shedeur Sanders is one of those guys. I don't know how many other players I could really point to that I'd say when the moment and the pressure rises, they can meet it. I think it's more of a collection of what happens over 4 quarters. But I think that's where the comment that Coach Prime made a few weeks back now to First Take, where he said, look, I'm about 7 to 8 dogs away. Dogs make plays in big moments. And Travis Hunter's a dog. But Travis Hunter, I mean, that dog got walked tonight. Walked. That catch in overtime from Io Manor where he pinned the ball against the back of Travis and mossed him. And, man, that's brutal. And then Shedeur should have never thrown that. Defensively, you give up 10 of 18 on 3rd down. That ain't any good. You know, that's rough. Stanford, man. They had like 53 yards passing at the end of the first half. They finished with 396. A lot of soul searching to do for Colorado over the next, week and a half, up until when you start really putting in some, game prep for UCLA. And that's a big test for this coaching staff. Eye test wise, how do you show up for that game, right? Like, is it clear that you had your team prepared in that game? Is it clear that your game plan is rock solid for that game? Because you got 2 weeks. You got 2 weeks to do it.
And then Colorado takes the ball first again in overtime. They managed to get the job done in the first overtime. In the second overtime, Shedeur throws a ball up that he never should have thrown. Coach Prime said that. Shedeur knows that, I promise. And it gets picked off. Stanford wins with a field goal. All you got to do there is just kick a field goal. If Shedeur doesn't throw that, then probably a tie game, probably heads into a third overtime. I look at Colorado's coaching staff on this one. I mean, yeah, you can look at the players who didn't execute, but you blow that big of a lead, and that's on the coaches. And we met with Coach Andre Hart, who's the linebackers coach this week, and in jest, he said that there's a lot of coaches that are wondering whether or not they should pay this mortgage next week or start looking to sell the house. Coach Prime's got to reevaluate. I think offensively, Sean Lewis, while he had a good game plan in the first half, he didn't adjust in the second half, and Stanford adjusted to what they were doing. And then I just thought, you got a 29-point lead. The adjustment for Sean Lewis, it's staring him right in the face. Run the football. Instead, they come out, empty set once again, pretty much the majority of that second half. And I appreciate that, right? Stanford's got a good run defense and a horrendous pass defense. I get that. But this is football. We talk about, how many times have I talked about this? You're either beholden to what you want to be, or you're adapting to what you need to be. And I thought it was just overall a far too aggressive approach in the second half, up 29-0. You go for it on 4th down, right out of the locker room at midfield. I don't know why. That jump started Stanford. They converted on the turnover on downs. It was 29-6, and before you knew it, it was 29-26. Then they went for it again on 4th down at midfield. It felt like just because they couldn't get anything going, it was like, okay, this is our time to really step on Stanford, but you're at midfield. You turn that thing over and you give them the ball back. There were some questionable decisions where they called some passes instead of runs. I asked Shedeur about the approach in the second half. He said, look, I don't look at it from a 30,000 foot view. I'm just trying to look at, individual plays. Well, I'll look at it for him from a 30,000 foot view. Sean Lewis was brutal in the second half and overtime. Inexplicably so. The lack of recognition of adjustments. Offensively, this team has struggled with all year adjusting in game. There has been some good things, but overall, I'd say there, again, another situation where far more down than up, right? Because, yeah, okay, the defense gives up 26 unanswered, including, 97-yard house call from Iomanor. Either way, I ought to know the guy's name. I don't know. He had to have an NCAA record for receiving yards in a half. It's got to be close to an NCAA record for receiving yards in a game that he put up in the second half and overtime combined. 294? I've never seen anything quite like this game. I mean, college football, man, you never know what's going to happen, but you didn't think that was going to happen. Colorado was sitting on the precipice of 5-2, entering the bye week, about to rejoin the national picture as far as the national conversation. Look, I don't know how it's going to play out moving forward as far as how much they're going to be involved in the national conversation, but I'll tell you what, the heat is going to die way down, way down. Everybody across the country got a chance to see this one and got a chance to see them melt down onto themselves. So, yeah, I do believe the national chatter is going to calm down. The amount of respect people pay to this program is probably going to chill out, because the truth is this. They escaped with the win in Tempe last week, and Coach Prime was extremely distraught. They put in a great week of practice. They clearly had an effective game plan tonight, and they didn't play for 4 quarters. Shedeur said you got to be ready to play for 4 quarters. You know, Coach Prime mentioned, I don't know how many guys in that locker room are in love with the game right now. I wouldn't be pointing at the players. Like, yeah, okay, the players gave up, you know, a huge lead, but that's coaching. I'm sorry. Colorado's coaching staff was terrible tonight. They were. I mean, yeah, you amass a 29-0 lead, but nobody can put their heels in the ground and stop that comeback. I mean, we'll have to go back and look at the film and really dive into everything, but it wasn't just that. It was the undisciplined nature of this team. I mean, 17 penalties for God knows how many penalty yards. I didn't even look after a certain point. 17 penalties. That killed them too. Make no mistake, as bad as the second half collapse was, had they not been penalized that much in the first half, I think in the first half they had 9 penalties to Stanford's 2. The penalty disparity and some ticky-tack, soft calls, I'll give CU credit in this. Some of those calls were bad. Okay. Colorado's secondary was really rough tonight, and defensively, the game plan. Look, I thought it was smart because you wanted more defensive backs in there to stop Stanford, because what Stanford does a lot is they like to attack the boundary. They'll get you out on the edge. You know, they utilize a lot of those sweeps, a lot of those reverses to try and put your corners in a position where they have to tackle in open space. And Colorado did a really good job of that, I thought, up until fourth quarter. Then all the issues they had with wrapping up, getting guys to the ground, they all pop back up. But I come back to, okay, well, what have we learned about Colorado through the first 6 games? Super dynamic offense when clicking. Failure in approach sometimes, certainly. They want to play hyper-tempo. In fact, they were leading 29-0 at the end of the first half, and they were down time of possession battle by 6 minutes. That's wild. Sometimes the Buffs need to find a way to learn how not to put their foot on the floor every possession. I know that's Sean Lewis's bag. I get it. It's his deal. You got to be able to have different speeds. And I felt like in the second half, because they refused to adapt, they refused to go back to the ground. And look, I get Stanford has a good rush defense, but you still have to go to the ground game and eat up some clock with a 30-point lead. In a lot of ways, Colorado allowed too many extra possessions with that hyper-tempo offense. It giveth and it taketh away in the second half because they weren't able to execute. They weren't able to get first downs. Credit to Stanford. Credit to Stanford, the Pac-12's worst defense. They were able to get Colorado off of the field, and in a very timely fashion. And in fact, I think Stanford had scored 19 unanswered right out of the chute in the third quarter before it was over, right? I mean, I think there was like 3 minutes left on the clock, and it was 29-19. Credit to that Stanford team. Colorado could not stop their quarterbacks from running tonight. In fact, if Troy Taylor doesn't throw the ball as much as they tried to in the first half, Stanford might have made it competitive in the first half. CU really couldn't stop the run again tonight. That reared its ugly head. Some odd vibes around this program right now. After the game, Coach Prime was asked about Juwan Mitchell because that was the second straight game he didn't play. Like I said, their defensive personnel, they were using a lot more defensive backs to try and get to the edges and be faster in space. Trevor Woods started at linebacker. There was a third down in this game where your defensive personnel was Travis Hunter, Omarion Cooper, Cameron Stillman-Craig, Roderick Ward, Shiloh Sanders, and Trevor Woods. And then 4 down linemen. What? Okay. It was a combo platter, Khalil Tate, Oregon State in 2018, which in the last, there have been some bad losses, certainly. Like, if you take away the last 2 years of just horrendous football, there have been some bad losses, but those two stick out to me as the most memorable, and tonight felt like those wrapped up in one. The worst part, I think, for the Buffs is, look, mentally, Coach Prime says you want to get back out there, and as I said, the universe is forcing the bye week one way or the other. I just think, mentally, that's going to be a really rough one to sit with for 2 weeks before you have to go on the road to play a damn good UCLA defense and a good UCLA team in a place that I don't think they've ever won since joining the Pac-12 in the Rose Bowl. Then Oregon State, Arizona, Washington State, Utah. This was the most winnable game left this season, and they blew it in a real way. They're 4-3 now. Bowl eligibility is in serious question. There was a good chance you were going to make a bowl, I think, if you had won tonight and managed to just hold Stanford off from a furious comeback and seal the deal in a game where you had a 29-point lead. However, now you got to win 2 of these last games against some thorn-in-your-side opponents. I mean, you talk about Oregon State as a team that is nasty to play against in Jonathan Smith's Beavers. UCLA, I just mentioned. Washington State in the Palouse in November, late November. Utah, late November. Man, look, it's already been a smashing success, but to give games away like they did tonight in such epic and humiliating fashion, those are tough ones to bounce back from. If we remember what happened to that team in 2018 after they blew that Oregon State game after leading 31-10 at half, you remember? They collapsed. They imploded onto themselves like a dying star. I don't think this team goes that direction simply because their quarterback is one of the best in the country. But even he makes some boneheaded plays trying to hit a home run too often, unfortunately. Great learning moments from him. And look, I mean, I do want to credit the game plan. I know I'm very hard on Sean Lewis for the performance in the second half, but getting Shedeur active in the first and second quarters on the ground, he had 8 carries for 72 yards at half. He was 14 of 18, 201 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. He was excellent. He really was. And a huge part of that was simply because he was tucking and running. He was recognizing the play, he was recognizing vacated space, and he was occupying it. That's brutal. I mean, that's as brutal as it gets. You don't deal with tougher losses. It's one of the worst losses in program history. It is, for sure. I mean, there maybe numerically there have been some worse ones, certainly, where you've gotten absolutely pummeled. But as far as terrible losses, that's right up there. They always say a loss is the same whether it's 1 point or it's a blowout. Not this one. Not this one. This one is going to take some time to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And for Coach Prime, this is a huge learning experience. How do you handle? And I give him credit. Somebody in the press conference said to me, give him credit. He was, he handled that well. What choice did he have? I mean, he's probably going to get buried anyway nationally. So coming out and, talking, it would have been uncharacteristic for him to be without class. He is the epitome of class, Coach Prime. And tonight, he showed it the post-game presser, but he was distraught. He doesn't know. I mean, I don't know, as a coach, how you can have the answers right after a game like this. You're going to have to watch the film. Talk about a tale of two halves. Holy cow. That was really rough because it's cold in here. I mean, I'm sure you can tell. I'm cold right now. And at the end of the day, I look at Colorado and I look at their approach in the second half as just an utter failure. It's just an utter failure. I mean, 29-point lead and they're sitting in 5 wide empty, spread of the boundary. You got Anthony Hankerson, you barely give him any touches. Alton McCaskill started the game. Didn't really utilize him. Utilized him as a receiver more than anything. I get the game plan, but you got to be able to adjust, man. And this is kind of what we keep talking about. And you know what was interesting is Coach Prime, it felt like in the back of his mind, knew this one was coming, right? The last few weeks. He talked about playing a clean game, and tonight he talked about not playing smart football. Well, I mean, look, 29-0. There are no excuses for blowing a 29-0 lead. There aren't. And he has been very weary the last several weeks to about the last month, and we've seen it since the CSU game. This team has flirted with fire. That one is really hard to wrap your head around as the type of person that Coach Prime is with the amount of success he's had. Shedeur Sanders being the same. Like, how do you bounce back from that game? You know, everybody in the postgame was talking about asking them, how do you flush this one? You don't flush that. No, you don't flush that at all. There is zero flushing that. You have 2 weeks to go through that thing with a fine-tooth comb. And look, for them, UCLA on the road is going to be a tough challenge. It's a good thing they have 2 weeks. And for this coaching staff, it's gut check time. Like, gut check time. I mean, they're way too good to blow games like that. And the rest of the year, they won't receive the attention that they had as a result of tonight. I mean, yes, okay, people pay attention and people are dialed in for the story, but that's a reality check, right? I mean, you blow a game like that, a team that's capable of blowing a game like that with the talent they have, what is happening, right? Like, what is going on here that allows you to succumb to that type of team in Stanford who can't throw the ball until the second half when one dude, 294 yards, second half and overtime. Never seen anything like that. Never. I mean, Xavier Weaver's incredible first half completely overshadowed. So this is a serious period of reflection now for this entire team, coaching staff, players. You know, Shedeur was asked the same question based upon what Coach Prime said after the game about, you know, do you have teammates that love the game? And he said he wasn't going to throw anybody under the bus, any of his teammates. Then he kind of did, and he was like, well, I'm not going to name names, but I can't speak for everyone. I'm sure that's happening around the country, and we probably have some of that too. May not be wrong. I didn't love that answer because, yeah, as good as he was in the first half, he was okay in the second half. Now he's under heavy fire, you know, and when you're under fire, it's a good time to run the ball. Colorado did tonight, not in the second half. Shedeur Sanders made up for the running game in the first half. He had 8 carries. Running backs had 6 carries. Secondary-wise, Carter Stoutmeyer really struggled. Cormani McLean really struggled. I know Amarion Cooper slipped and fell on that 97-yard touchdown reception. He's been so good for them over the better part of the last month and a half. I find it interesting that he's a part of a rotation rather than just that dude on the outside. We'll see how that plays out moving forward. I just think veteran experience kind of later in the season probably helps out. More than halfway done with the season, and you just took your first bad loss, and it was an epic one. How do you respond? How does a coaching staff respond? You have 2 weeks to do so. What does it look like? I can't wait to see. And I know that from a program's perspective, that it is certainly not all doom and gloom because, like I said, you already smashed your season win total. This has already been an overwhelming success for Coach Prime. But more than anything, man, it's again, picking yourself up by your bootstraps, dialing yourself back in mentally again, and getting ready to play some of your toughest games left on the calendar. You know, from a coaching failure, I thought, of epic proportions in the second half. And again, you know, players, yeah, be better than that, but coaches, man, 29-0, that's on you. Coach Prime, he knew it, you know. He knew it. He kept his composure the best he could. I think he caught himself a few moments in the presser, but sheesh, that was tough to watch. That was tough to watch. No matter where you were, you're on your couch or cold here in the stadium, that was a rough one. And Colorado was going to try and put the pieces back together on the road in the Rose Bowl the end of October. That's the next matchup for the Buffs. And they got next week off, clearly, before they head on the road to LA. We'll see how the rest of the season plays out, but from a very chilly night from Folsom Field that Buff fans would love to forget. That'll do it.